welcome to episode 7 of Let's Talk with Aaron Johnson. On this episode, I'm just going to come right out and say it. This episode may be a little triggering for some people, and that's not my intention, but at the same time, I do want to take some time and talk about some current events. So, this episode is going to be about DEI, how it is inherently racist and completely and utterly unconstitutional. So we're going to just dive right into this. Thank you for following, watching this podcast. Feel free to share this with your friends and family, and make sure you click that like and follow on my YouTube channel. And that way, and click that little bell so you get notifications when I put new content up. So, most of what I'm going to talk about right here is from Wikipedia. And the reason I did that is it was kind of a one stop shop. It had information from all the different, from those who are for um, DEI and those are kind of against it. And it has a pretty good discussion about DEI. Now, I'm not going to read everything that it had on it. I've gone through here, and this is my notes about it. Um, you can tell that's a hefty chunk of paper there. But I wanted to take a look at it. Let's talk about it because it's something that's really going on, and there's a lot of people that are very upset with it. And so I just thought that hey, if we if we're doing this talking about the Constitution and such things, we need to talk about current events as well. So let's just dive right in here. What is DEI? In the United States, diversity, equity, and inclusion are organizational frameworks that seek to promote the fair treatment and full participation of all people, particularly groups who have historically been underrepresented, or subject to discrimination based on identity or disability. These three notions, diversity, equity, and inclusion, together represent three closely linked values which organizations seek to institutionalize through DEI frameworks. And it goes on into further detail on later on in here about some things in it. Some of it closely reflects my thoughts on it, and other things it does not. So let's go a little further here. It gives some definitions of diversity. So diversity refers to the presence of variety within the organizational workforce and characteristics such as race, gender, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, age, culture, class, veteran status, or religion. That is diversity. All great things. All great things. All of that. And that's the thing that people don't understand is the people who are opposed to DEI are not opposed to DEI because they're racist. We'll dig into that a little further as we go. Equity refers to concepts of fairness and justice, such as fair compensation and substantive equality. Equity usually also includes a focus on societal disparities and allocating resources and decision making authority to groups that have historically been disadvantaged, and taking into consideration a person's unique circumstances, adjusting treatment accordingly so that the end result is equal. We'll go on. Finally, inclusion refers to creating an organizational culture that creates an experience where all employees feel their voices will be heard and a sense of belonging and integration. DEI policies are often used by managers to increase the happiness, productivity, and collaborative efforts of their workforce and to reinforce positive communication. Um, the issue with DEI, just in the definitions, is that those who are opposed to DEI aren't opposed to working with um, people of different race or gender or ethnicity or even sexual orientation, disability, age, culture, class, veteran status, or religion. That isn't what people who oppose DEI are opposed to. What they are opposed to is being shoved down their throat. That's where the issue comes in. Not because the Constitution has already given us amendments saying that we can't discriminate because of race, gender, um, age, or religion. Okay, so there's already laws about that. If a person feels like they have been discriminated against, they have legal recourse. But shoving it down the throat of people who don't care, or not that they don't care, that it isn't an issue for them, it makes it an issue for them. And actually, the Wikipedia actually brings that up in here. So we'll go on. Those who are proponents of DEI, I understand. I do. I do. You feel like that, you have been um, mistreated and treated incorrectly or wrongly, and I understand. I do. I really do. And maybe I'll tell you a little bit about myself as we go along through this. Um, but I do understand. And you're heard. That's the thing. You're heard. And there are legal recourses for you besides shoving it down everybody's throat. And then they can't say anything when it's wrong. Or, but we'll get to that. DEI efforts and policies have generated criticism and controversy, some directed at the specific effectiveness of its tools, such as diversity training. And I do agree with that. Forcing people to sit and listen to, because and it's not that the diversity training, it's who they get to bring it to just do the diversity training. Um, they bring in the most radical, idealized individual or groups of individuals to try to force people who are not to see their way of thinking. And they don't do what I'm doing here and tell you that you're heard, or and that I understand your feelings, because I do. I really do. And so do a lot of other people who are opposed to DEI. Now, having said that, there really are some people who are racist and anti-Semitic and anti-sexual orientation, and they aren't blunt about it. And they, unfortunately, in the same way for the proponents of DEI, they are the most vocal because the same way that those who are proponents of DEI are also the most vocal. Meanwhile, there's people from both, right in the middle, who are just like, just let me go to work, or let me live my life. I understand that you feel upset about this, but I didn't do it. So let's roll on. Okay. Also, its effect, these people also are criticize it for its effect on free speech and academic freedom, as well as more broadly attracting criticism on political or philosophical grounds. And also, because of the way DEI has been introduced and the way DEI has been forced on businesses, organizations, and the everyday American, when someone gets hired due to DEI, we call them a DEI hire, and it kind of turns into a slur against that individual, which doesn't at all accomplish what DEI was intended to do. DEI is not a new concept, although there are many today. If you listen to the local or national news, you'll hear a lot of people talk like it's their idea. It's something new that they cooked up. It's not. It has been around for a very long time, and a lot of them think it's something they have cooked up to correct the injustice of the world. Um, and in the process, they have gone the other way with it. It's the same way when the Ku Klux Klan was a major, when they first started right after the Civil War, they took it too far, too wrong, and their methods were incorrect. A lot of people paid for it. Even people who were not of African descent, if they disagreed with the Ku Klux Klan in its heyday, they paid the price too. And that is the problem with DEI type programs. Um, when you try to force your thoughts and your beliefs on someone else, then you always, always too far. If you don't think so, then look at um, the Nazis of Germany. Look at the communists of the USSR. Okay, that's just two glaring examples. The communists of China. I mean, look at Tiananmen Square in 1989, I believe it was. Um, those types of things. That's why DEI is so dangerous, and thinking that your thoughts and your ideas are the only way to go. I'm not at all opposed to, let's talk about this. You may have a legitimate complaint. But let's talk about it. Don't shove it down my throat, and don't shove it down the throat of those people who aren't anti you. By shoving it down your throat, you're creating them to be anti you. That's the issue. That's where it comes from. So, in early history, let's see here. Early DEI efforts included preferential hiring to veterans of the U.S. Civil War and their widows in 1865. And then in 1876, this was amended to give preference to veterans during a reduction in force, um, when they started decreasing the army, or when businesses start and cut their forces, their workforce, then they had to keep so many Civil War veterans. That's not fair. That's not right at all. Not at all. Um, and then in 1921 and 1929, executive orders by Presidents Coolidge and Harding established 10-point preference for veterans towards exams and hiring criteria for federal employment. Uh, I don't know. I really don't. I mean, in 1944, the Veterans Preference Act codified the previous executive orders, clarified criteria, and included special hiring provisions for disabled veterans. Later amendments added veterans from conflicts after World War II, special provisions for the mothers of disabled or deceased veterans, and job specific training for veterans entering the federal or private workforce. Again, I don't feel like that is right. Our veterans, yes, our veterans have paid a price, but should they get preferential treatment over someone who may be more qualified, but since simply because they have been a veteran, that gives them 10 points higher, and that's still in effect actually. 10 points higher in the grade scale to be employed when they don't have the expertise that we're looking for this job. And this is veterans, and I totally disagree. Should not should not happen. And in 1936, President FDR signed the Randolph-Shepard Act, which mandated the federal government to give preference to purchase products made by the blind and established a committee on purchase of blind-made products. Really. And then in 1971, Javits Wagner O'Day Act expanded the Randolph Shepard Act and changed the name to the Committee for Purchase from People Who Are Blind or Severely Disabled. That is now called Ability One. Blind made products are used throughout the federal government and include brands such as Skillcraft, Arc Diversified, Austin Lighthouse, and Ability One. Maybe I'm just really, really strange. I don't know. But, if somebody makes a product and I need it or I want it, I buy it. It's that simple. It really is. It doesn't matter. Yes, I personally think that USA made products are better. Um, but that's just me. But anyway, let's roll on. Now, other DEI policies included affirmative action. It was first used in Executive Order number 10, number 10925, which was signed by President John F. Kennedy in March of 1961, which included a provision that government contractors take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and employees are treated fairly during employment without regard to their race, creed, color, or national origin. It was used to promote actions that achieve non discrimination. Um, and then in September of 1965, President Johnson issued Executive Order 11246, which required government employers to hire without regard to race, religion, and national origin and take affirmative action to ensure that applicants are employed and that employees are treated during employment without regard to their race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin. Neither executive order nor the Civil Rights Act authorized group preferences. The Senate floor manager of the bill, uh, Hubert Humphrey, declared that the bill would prohibit preferential treatment for any particular group, adding, "I will eat my hat if this leads to racial quotas." Well, it did. I hope he enjoyed his hat. More recently, concepts have moved beyond discrimination to include diversity, equity, and inclusion as motives for preferring historically underrepresented groups. In the case of Regents of the University of California v. Back, diversity became a constitutional law factor. The Supreme Court ruled that quotas were illegal, but it was allowable to consider race as a plus factor when trying to foster diversity in their classes. So the Supreme Court has set up a precedent saying that um, quotas, that requiring and expecting and obtaining quotas of certain amounts of people, dependent, on their race and sex and religion and sexual preference, is illegal. That's a precedent, and as we discussed in our earlier episode, that sets a precedent, which means that that is what lower courts and the Supreme Court will look at and be like, okay, so we ruled then that it was illegal, and so nothing really has changed. So therefore, that's what the history is. Um, that is not what they've done. So then we move on to the 1980s. Ronald Reagan discussed dismantling equality and affirmative action laws in the 1980s. And those professionals, equality and affirmative action professionals employed by American firms, along with equality consultants, engaged in establishing the argument that a diverse workforce should be seen as a competitive advantage rather than just as a legal constraint. The problem is that it is not a competitive advantage because the people within that organization are grouped um, by their race, religion, or ethnicity and sex because of the way it's done, not because that's necessarily the what they want to do or that they need to do. And no person at any time, and this happened during the Civil War, it was a great quote, said that, and I can't remember who it was. It was just a quote that I came across years ago reading in a book, and I can't remember who said it or what it was, but it was like nobody enjoys being called a devil. Nobody enjoys being called evil. And because during the Civil War or prior to the Civil War, the people in the North were calling the Southerners evil and the spawn of the devil. And the people in the South were calling the Northerners evil and the spawn of the devil. But what neither one of them even considered. Okay. And this is what's the funniest thing about what happened during the Civil War is that the people of the North, were just as prejudiced against the slaves as those in the South. They didn't like them. They didn't want them. They didn't want them there. That's why they kept trying. I mean, because if you really study, there was numerous attempts to try to gather and make it law where anyone of African descent was put back on a boat and sent back to Africa. Most, well, all, the majority of the African descent people during the Civil War were born and raised in the United States. But they weren't even from Africa. Okay. That's how bad these ideas get. And that's why DEI is so dangerous. Okay. But let's keep going because I'm just trying to make arguments here. And it goes both ways here. Um, and then in the 1990s, President George H.W. Bush signed Americans with Disabilities Act, which requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations to employees with disabilities and imposes accessibility requirements on public accommodations. I mean, honestly, to have your business accessible to those in wheelchairs or have those people who have to use walkers should have never had to be made into law. It really shouldn't. I don't understand why it needed to, and why that you would have to have a law to tell you that you need to have a restroom where somebody who's in a wheelchair and who's paralyzed can't get to a restroom. That's just seems anyway. President Clinton signed the Veterans Employment Opportunities Act in 1998. It helps eligible veterans access federal job opportunities by allowing them to compete for positions typically only to current federal employees and by reinforcing veterans' preference in hiring. Now, I don't agree with the reinforcing veterans' preference in hiring, but that they should be allowed to apply for jobs that normally only are advertised within federal government, people who are already employed by the federal government, that's not bad because technically, even though they are a soldier in the U.S. Army, a sailor in the Navy, or an airman in the Air Force, or a United States Marine or a what are they Coast Guard? What are people in the Coast Guard called? Sailors? I don't know. I'll have to look that up. That's kind of interesting. But those people, even though they're in those different branches of service, they are still federal employees. They work for the United States government. So them being eligible for employment opportunities that's only offered to federal employees, that is absolutely correct. Um, but again, preferring them over someone else is not, especially because sometimes you get those people because they're preferred over it, but they don't have the experience to actually do the job, and that makes them dangerous. It makes the job less. Does that make sense? Makes people look down on them because of that, and that's just wrong. That's just wrong. Whatever happened to getting a job because of your merit, because you earned it? So that's where I'm at with that. But since the 2000s, by 2003, the corporations spent $8 billion annually on diversity. In 2009, in response to calls for the US government to do more for disabled veterans returning from the conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan, President Obama signed Executive Order 13518, which established the Veterans Employment Initiative. So, what is that? Five, six, seven presidents that have all signed executive orders and have yet for them to become law, except for the Disabilities Act. Hmm. This was to enhance recruitment and retention of veterans in the federal workforce by creating a comprehensive framework to support their transition to civilian employment. It directed federal agencies to increase veteran hiring, set goals for improvement, and established the Veterans Employment Program Office to provide assistance and resources for veterans in civilian employment. He also then signed Executive Order 13583 concerning diversity and inclusion. And after the election of President Trump in 2016 and the ascent of the Me Too and Black Lives Matter movements, Time magazine stated in 2019 that the DEI industry had exploded in size. And a survey in 2019 found that spending on DEI efforts had increased 27% over the five preceding academic years in schools. And that's including colleges, local, just public schools, and then colleges, universities. Let's go on. In support of DEI hiring during the first term of Donald Trump, the Office of Civil Rights of the Federal Aviation Authority, the FAA, on April 11th, 2019, announced a pilot program to help prepare people with disabilities for careers in air traffic operations, which identifies specific opportunities for people with targeted disabilities to facilitate their entry into a more diverse and inclusive workforce in a standard public opening for air traffic controller jobs, with the potential to be appointed to a temporary position at the FAA Academy. So, if I understand this one correctly, the FAA says we're going to take these people who know nothing about directing planes as a uh, don't call them dispatchers, what are they called anyway, at airports, and then also flights and all that, and then they're going to turn them into instructors. That's what that says. How how if you don't know how to fly a plane, how are you going to be an instructor on it? If you don't know how to do the job, how are you going to be an instructor? Again, it's going the wrong way. It's going too far. Okay, and this is why recently um, President Trump and his second administration said that the FAA is dangerous and ended DEI programs because now we're going to have people directing aircraft that know the job. And I have no problem with someone who has gotten their job through a DEI program, who has gotten their job and they know what they're doing and they're competent at it. Let's great. I'm not saying fire everybody who's ever gotten a job through DEI or through affirmative action because that's wrong. It goes the other way. Again, it swings the other direction. And that's not at all what's going on and what needs to happen. That's nowhere near it at all. Period. One 2020 estimate placed the size of the global diversity and inclusion market at $7.5 billion, dollars, of which 3.4 billion was in the United States, but it also projected it to reach 17.2 billion by 2027. So, if you're legitimately thinking right now, perhaps you can join me in thinking this, but would that not show that the entire DEI process and the entire DEI situation is all about money? The same way that Black Lives Matter, if you pay attention to recent articles and news, a lot of the money that was donated to Black Lives Matter has disappeared or ended up in the bank accounts of those who were running it. Um, the same with Me Too. It's about the money, and I that's horrible because they really the people who are screaming the loudest really don't care. They really don't care about the people that they say that they're fighting for. It's all about the money or to be included in a special group saying, I was for this, but those people over there were not. And the reason you are in the situation you are is because of those people over there. But I took your money. You donated and I didn't give it where it needed to go. And in 2023, the Supreme Court explicitly rejected affirmative action regarding race in college admissions in Students for Fair Admissions v. Harvard. The court held that affirmative action programs lack sufficiently focused and measurable objectives warranting the use of race, unavoidably employ race in a negative manner, involve racial stereotyping, and lack meaningful endpoints. We have never permitted admission programs to work in that way, and we will not do so today. This is from the Supreme Court. This is their ruling, their wording. And honestly, I couldn't have said it any better because basically what they're saying is that affirmative action regarding race is and there this is specifically about schools, but you take the same thoughts, it's inherently racist. And that's what he said. Unavoidably employ race in a negative manner because that's what it happens. That's what it does. That's what it does. And that's why I wanted to talk about this because I don't think people quite understand. And I do not want someone to be, you know, disadvantaged or prejudiced against because of their race or their sex or their sexual orientation or where they're from. Um, there's no reason for that. It is 2025. We should be well past this. Well past this. And in as of 2024, affirmative action in the United States have been increasingly replaced by emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, while 9 states explicitly banned affirmative action use in the employment process. In 2024 and 2025, several large American companies scaled back or ended their DEI programs owing to pressure from the Trump administration and, in some cases, related policies such as participation in the corporate corporate equality index. Sorry about that. These companies included Google, Boeing, Disney, Walmart, Meta, Amazon, McDonald's, Ford, Lowe's, Harley Davidson, John Deere, Tractor Supply, Target, Toyota, and PBS. Generally, these companies said they will continue to foster a safe and inclusive workplace, as they should. As they should. A person should never go to an employee, go to an employment job, and go to a job where they feel like they are being attacked because of their race, their religion, their ethnicity, or their sex. At no time. No time. You don't have to have DEI programs to know that that is wrong. If you're a person who participates in that, shame on you. Shame on you. It's just the way it is. Okay. That's just the way it is. Also, in this period, other companies have reaffirmed their commitment to DEI, including Apple, Ben and Jerry's, Delta Airlines, Deutsche Bank, Microsoft, JP Morgan, Chase, Goldman Sachs, Costco, and the NFL. The NFL, really. So, in January of 2025, President Trump called DEI efforts illegal and immoral discrimination programs and public waste. And in his January 20th executive order, rescinded Executive Order 11246 on January 21st, demanding that all governmental DEI programs be shut down by January 23rd and placed employees on administrative leave and eventual layoff. Now, see, this is where a lot of people went crazy because they said he's getting rid of all the DEI hires. That's not what he said. The only people that are being on administrative leave and then eventual layoff are those who worked within the DEI programs themselves, not those who were hired through the DEI programs. See, that's the difference. But that's where everybody, the mainstream media was like, "Oh no. Oh no, no, he's firing all the employees." That's not what he said, and that's not what he issued here. What he issued was those people who are working within the DEI offices of the federal government are placed on administrative leave and eventually laid off. Not that they can't get another job, they're just not going to work in a DEI office. And that is the difference. He did not say all DEI hires are gone. That's not what he said. But I don't he is correct that DEI efforts are illegal and immoral discrimination programs. They are. DEI by its very nature is racist and discriminatory. And if you how can you say that because I am such and I am from such and such that I should be hired over someone who has done that job before or is qualified for that job, but I have no skill for that job. That's the problem. But yet that person would be hired over the person who's qualified. And that is absolutely wrong and illegal. We we have constitutional amendments that say so. But the person who is qualified for that job is just going to be like, okay, I'll just go somewhere else because they're not here to cause trouble. They just want a job. But if someone who's skilled gets the job over a person who is one of the people that DEI covers, well, those people are going to start screaming, I've been prejudiced against, I have been discriminated against, and make a big stink about it. A lawsuit in February of 2025 was filed against Trump's executive orders, arguing that they were unconstitutional. And the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit paused the lower court's nationwide preliminary injunction and permitted the enforcement of the executive orders pending the outcome of the appeal. Again, that goes back to those nationwide injunctions that we talked about in our last um, podcast, episode 6, I believe that one was. So if you want to read about nationwide injunctions and how they are unconstitutional, then go on back to episode 6 and listen to that one. References to women, people of color, and LGBTQ individuals have been scrubbed from federal websites, image archives, and physical installations. And a lady by the name of Brenda Sue Fulton says that this administration has hung a sign outside the armed forces saying, if you're not a white male, you are no longer welcome. Not what they said, what was said, not what was done, not what was said. The rationale for all of this is that affirmative action is intended to promote the opportunities of defined minority groups within a society to give them equal access to that of the majority population. The philosophical basis of the policy has various rationales, including but not limited to compensation for past discrimination, correction of current discrimination, and the diversification of society. Philosophical basis of affirmative action includes but not limited to compensation for past discrimination. Now, if they're talking about case by case and it's taken to court and sued, fantastic. Because if you can prove it, great. Because it shouldn't have happened. It shouldn't have happened. But if they're talking about a blanket reparation, is that's the term I think they use sometimes. No, that is absolutely 100% unconstitutional. Remember us talking about um, in several of our podcasts, we've talked about treason and how treason cannot be can only be like for that person that commits treason. It isn't to go against their entire family, not against their kids, not against their parents, not against their spouses. Um, that you that's no, no. Correction of current discrimination. Again, if it's case by case, then yes, do this. Um, and the diversification of society. But here's the thing, okay? So let's talk about this. In New York City, they have an area called Chinatown. Okay. So according to this policy, then Chinatown can not exist. We have to move people in there. We have to diversify that. The same thing with there are certain neighborhoods And the reason this happens is because people with like traditions and like past want to group together. It's the beauty of our country. There are entire neighborhoods and entire towns that are simply Irish or Scottish or Russian. There is actually a neighborhood, I believe, in New York City that is predominantly um, Russian. People from Russia. That's not a discriminatory remark. That's where they're from. That's their background. Um, and there's places like that, like Appalachia. There are very many communities that are, they are Appalachian communities. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Try to diversify that, you're gonna get in trouble because people that would come in there and be like, I don't know. I mean, they've made movies on that stuff. Like Wrong Turn. Yeah, that's a horrible movie. Scary. The stated justification for affirmative action by its proponents is to help compensate for past discrimination, persecution, or exploitation by the ruling class of a culture, and to address existing discrimination. In a business environment, increased workforce diversity has been found to be associated with increased performance. And I can see that because, I mean, not everybody should think alike. So if you are designing things and you have people from different cultures all working together in the design of things, that's a great idea. It's a great idea. I mean, come on. That's a great idea because you'll have different points of view and different reasoning from these different people and these different races and nationalities and sexes and all these different, it's a great idea. And it's true. It will, as long as you don't force it down their throats on either side. Okay, on either side, because this works just the same for a majority black owned business as a majority Caucasian owned business. It works either way. You hear less about DEI programs in majority black owned businesses, but the insinuation and these DEI policies should still be in effect. Right? I mean, if we're going to say this is what needs to happen, then that's what needs to happen. Okay. Now we go on to methods and arguments, and this is where it brings up several of why some people are against and some people are for. In a 2018 article, proponents of DEI argued that because businesses and corporations exist within a larger world, they cannot be completely separated from the issues that exist in society. Therefore, the authors argue the need for DEI to improve coworker relations and teamwork. But what they didn't look at, okay, what they did not look at was, do we have a mix? I mean, because there are some places, some businesses that have no racial, interracial employment. And it's not because that company is inherently racist or that they don't hire or want to hire minorities of any form that DEI covers. we'll just go with minorities, okay? Um, it's that ma- the people in that area are of one race or one ethnicity. It's not that they are inherently racist. There's just not um, the groups around, and that doesn't make them racist. But this policy would say that that business is breaking the law because they don't have a certain amount, especially if it's a small business. They don't have a certain amount of DEI hires, and that would make them then at that point, according to the DEI policies, would make that company inherently racist and illegal. And that's not true because if the people aren't there to be hired, then you can't be forced to hire them if they're not there. But that's something they don't think about, right? As of 2022, many academic institutions in the US have also started making commitments to DEI in different ways, including creating documents, programs, and appointing dedicated staff members, especially in the US. Many accreditation agencies now require supporting DEI. So before a college can be considered accredited and to get a degree and get a job in the business world, you have to go to an accredited university or college or community college, whatever. But they have to be accredited. And what's saying here is that a lot of the accreditation policies now have to show DEI. And the problem is that many scholarships and opportunities at universities even have a secondary purpose of encouraging diversity. Diversity in higher education can be difficult, with diverse students often feeling reduced to fulfilling a diversity quota, which can carry a high emotional tax. This is what I'm talking about. See, this is why I say that DEI is inherently racist because now we've got these students who feel like that the only reason that they're at this university is because this university said they needed a certain amount of that type of student. It's not very good for your mental capacity, right? That's why DEI is racist in its mere functions. Within healthcare, DEI reflective groups have been used to enhance the cultural sensitivity within mental health professionals. Such reflective spaces help improve mental health professionals' reflexivity and awareness of DEI related issues, both within direct clinical work with clients, their families, and wider systems, as well as within professional supervision and teams. In other words, they're saying that, we tell these people that they have to blame their ethnicity or race for their problems instead of that it's their problem and we can help them with it, right? Mhm. In the corporate world, diversity management as a concept appeared and gained momentum in the US in the mid 1980s. Equality and affirmative action professionals employed by US firms, along with equality consultants, engaged in establishing the argument that a diverse workforce should be seen as a competitive advantage rather than just as a legal constraint. Their message was do not promote diversity because it is a legal mandate, but because it is good for business. But is it? But is it? If you have if these programs are shoved down the throats of employees who are already employed at this business, and then you bring in a diverse group and say that these people are now your betters because of the DEI program, h- how does that promote diversity? I've worked in factories where we had a diverse group of people, and we all got along. We had a great time. We had people who, you know, um, their sexual orientation was different than everybody else. We had people whose ethnicity was different than everybody else's. Um, the sex was actually split probably just about 50-50, to be honest with you. And that was just simply because that was how it was hired. But that was well before DEI, and everybody got along. We had a great time. There were 400 and some people in that place, and we had a great time. Yeah, I mean, there was arguments, but that's usually because, so and so said something about so and so, not because so and so was a different race. Um,